Good morning, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. Our church is founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics, and everyone is invited to give a talk as long as it's on an atheist subject. So today we have a talk on the book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and the subtitle for the meetup was Conservatives, Liberals, and Psychopaths. So thanks very much.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with a quiz. And what I want you to do is I want you to put up your hand, and I'm going to be accepting values between 0 and 5, where 0 means strongly disagree, 5 means strongly agree. And so we're just going to go through these one by one. Let me get my pen out here for a second. There we go. All right, so remember, 0 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. Let's start with question number 1. One of the worst things a person could do is hurt a defenseless animal. Okay, hands up, come on. Everyone has to vote. Say, I see 4s, lots of 4s. Oh, really? Okay, so I'll do on average, wow, no one for 5, really? Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, so I'll say 4 on that one. Number 2, I think it's morally wrong that rich children inherit a lot of money while poor children inherit nothing. Okay, wow, okay, so we're getting, you're going to throw off our average here, but okay, I'm going to put down 1 on this one, okay? Number 3, people should be loyal to their family members even when they have done something wrong. That's 0. Wow, okay, so we got like, again, maybe I'll give this one a 3. I think that's sort of averaged out. Okay, here's question number 4. If I were a soldier and disagreed with my commanding officer's orders, I would obey anyway because that is my duty. Wow, there's a lot of variation on this one. I'm just going to put 3, I'll average everyone out. Okay, this is a very scientific survey I'm taking here, you can tell. Okay, number 5, last one. Chastity is an important and valuable virtue. All right, so I'm going to maybe give that one a 1. I don't know. I think that one got knocked out. All right, so these are questions from Jonathan Haidt's questionnaire on moral foundations. This is part of his moral foundation quiz. This is a subset. There's about 3 times more questions than this. And this is the basis of a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today. He gave this quiz to over 130,000 people, and he correlated the results together, where he had people who took the quiz rate themselves on a spectrum from being very, very liberal to being very conservative, and he used this to figure out how different moral attitudes correspond with different people's political leanings. So, according to what you guys just put down, you seem to be, well, you seem to be a liberal church. So you guys seem to be more on the liberal side. Big surprise there. In general, going through the questions, the first question was a question about caring. And you guys put a high value on that. Then we had one on fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And so you put less of a value on that. And for Jonathan Haidt, that's the distinction between being a liberal and a conservative. Liberals tend to put a lot of emphasis on caring and fairness, and conservatives put a lot of emphasis on the other 3 moral foundations. So that's how he divides up the universe. So let me talk a little more about his theory. So I'm pulling all of this stuff I'm talking about today from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. Let me start with his overall theory. The first part of the book is devoted to the general claim that intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second, where the central metaphor is the mind is divided like a rider on an elephant, and the rider's job is to serve the elephant. So first part of the book is really devoted to trying to dismantle what he calls the standard theory of morality in psychology. And so let me explain what that standard moral psychology theory is. It's based on Piaget's work on different levels of development, that people go through different levels of development, and that from Piaget's perspective, children are little scientists who, by the use of reason, are able to figure out how the world works by performing, as little scientists will, by performing experiments to figure out how the world around them works. So from Piaget's perspective, people go through standard stages of development where they are capable of understanding physics at each additional stage by experimenting with the world. Now, Lawrence Kohlberg based his work on what Piaget had done, and he wants to talk about children going through stages of social development in the same way that Piaget talked about children going through different stages of development understanding physics. So from Kohlberg's perspective, there's really, there are 4 main stages of development. In the first 2 stages, which he calls the pre-conventional stage, that's when children just believe that what's right or wrong is dependent on what they get punished for. So if you go over and you punish a child for, I don't know, taking a cookie off a plate, then that's just a bad thing because the parents, punish the child for taking the cookie off the plate. And that's called the pre-conventional stage. So that's stages 1 and 2. And then Kohlberg says stage 2 and 3, that's when children get to the conventional stage. So that's when children get obsessed with rules, right? They understand that there's rules for doing things, and they understand when they're violating the rules. And children tend to be very legalistic at this stage. For example, this morning, my daughter kept poking my son, and I kept saying, "Stop poking my son," and then she took a broom handle, and she poked my son. That would be an example of being overly conventional and legalistic. So that's very common for this stage. To try to figure out what the rules and follow the rules. Stage 3 and 4 is the post-conventional stage. And this is normally when a child goes into adolescence, and they start thinking abstractly about the world, and they start thinking about justification for these different conventional rules. And so this is a stage where Kohlberg thinks that children become natural moral philosophers. They start using their reason, constructing morality by seeing how children interact. And the point is that they're discovering morality by interacting in the world, in their social universe, in the same way that Piaget said that children figure out, how volume is conserved by pouring glasses of water between different glasses, by interacting and learning physics. So for both Piaget and Kohlberg, they believe that authority figures just get in the way of children's moral development. Haidt writes, quote, "If you want your kids to learn about the physical world, let them play with cups and water. Don't lecture them about the conservation of volume. And if you want your kids to learn about the social world, let them play with other kids and resolve disputes. Don't lecture them about the 10 Commandments. And for heaven's sake, don't force them to obey God or their teachers or you. That will only freeze them at the conventional level." Egads, conventional level. They'll be frozen there. So what Haidt argues is Kohlberg's theory of moral progression became the standard psychological liberal theory of morality, that this became the standard thing that was taught, that children go through these moral stages. And really a lot of morality is preventing harm to others and allowing children to interact naturally in the social world to discover the actual moral rules that work in the social world. Haidt writes, "Kohlberg's timing was perfect. Just as the first wave of baby boomers was entering graduate school, he transformed moral psychology into a boomer-friendly ode to justice, and he gave them a tool to measure children's progress toward the liberal ideal. For the next 25 years, from the 1970s through the 1990s, moral psychologists mostly just interviewed young people about moral dilemmas and analyzed their justifications. Most of this work was not politically motivated, it was careful and honest scientific research, but by using a framework that predefined morality as justice while denigrating authority, hierarchy, and tradition, it was inevitable the research would support worldviews that were secular, questioning, and egalitarian." So anyway, sorry, that's kind of a long quote, but again, the idea is that Kohlberg's theory of moral development became the standard one, and it supported a lot of liberal values. All right, so what Haidt wants to do is he wants to challenge the standard theory of morality. And the way he challenged it is, if the standard theory of morality was right, and the biggest concern people had was not causing harms to others, then you should be able to come up with these stories that where no harm is caused to another person, but we still have moral reactions to. And so what he did is he put together a set of stories where people felt there was some sort of moral violation. Couldn't be a social violation, had to be a moral violation, and it didn't fit into Kohlbergs' progression of development. So here's the story. A woman is cleaning out her closet, and she finds her old American flag. She doesn't want the flag anymore, so she cuts it up into pieces and uses the rags to clean her bathroom.
How is that not socially violent? I'm sorry.
Well, no, but it's both a social violation and a moral violation, because according to, so his idea is that, Kohlberg would accept that certain things are social violations, but that's different from a fundamental moral violation, which he says is universal and more, I don't know. So, but he wants to claim that people would recognize this not only as sort of a violation of conventions or social conventions. It's not just impolite, it's morally wrong, is what he wants to claim. All right, so what he did is he did some surveys, and he did the surveys in two very different locations. He went off to Brazil, and he surveyed people in both the upper class and the lower class, and then he went to Philadelphia, and he interviewed both, weird undergraduate psychology students in the, special sense of weird, and also lower class people in Philadelphia outside of a local McDonald's. And he just went through and he had multiple versions of this question, right? That all had to do with some sort of, where there's not actually a harm being caused, but some sort of, violation of morality. And what he found is that unexpectedly, the social class effect was much larger than the effect of the city. So lower class people in both Brazil and Philadelphia agreed that these were moral violations. That, using the American flag to clean your bathroom is a moral violation. Upper class people in both Brazil and in the United States didn't consider it a moral violation, they just considered a violation of social conventions. So it was a class-based distinction. And the other thing that he discovered when he was doing the surveys is, if you asked, what was the root of the moral violation here, he said that people were morally dumbfounded. That's the phrase he uses. But the idea of morally dumbfounded is they couldn't actually express why it was a moral violation. It just was. It just, they felt it in their gut. They had the intuition. What are you talking about? You're using the American flag to clean your bathroom? Are you crazy? Of course that's wrong. But it's not like they came up with a long argument where they could justify it. They just said, of course, it's just wrong. So Haidt is a defender of David Hume. So he believes that most of what goes on in moral judgments is not conscious at all. It's not that we come to these rational conclusions. We're not little moral philosophers like Kohlberg wanted to claim. We come up with our moral rules because they're gut feelings. There's intuitions that we feel in these different situations. And what Haidt uses is this metaphor of a rider and an elephant. So the idea is you have this elephant, which is the bulk of what's going on in your mind, but it's unconscious, you don't really know what's going on there. And then you have this rider on top of the elephant, who's most of the time just acting as a spokesperson for the elephant. So he has to justify what the elephant just did afterwards and try to convince other people that, hey, that wasn't something immoral. The elephant just did that because, of X or Y or whatever. But the rider's just along for the ride. All the real action is happening at the gut level. Okay, so this led Haidt to do the big moral survey that I gave you a part of earlier. And what Haidt wants to argue is his basic premise is there's much more to morality than just harm and fairness. And what he wants to argue is that we live in a really weird country, that there's something special about the United States and Europe that's exceptional in human history, and that if you look at what people believe in the rest of the world, they have many, many more foundations than we do to decide moral questions. He likes to compare it to taste receptors. It's as if in the United States we can only taste salt, But in the rest of the world, they can taste, they have other taste receptors for sweet and I don't know, whatever the bitter and whatever the sour, whatever the other taste receptors are. So we are more limited in our moral taste receptors. And the other thing that he says, which is very controversial, is his main thesis is the big difference between liberals and conservatives is liberals only really use 2 of their taste receptors. In other words, they only have 2 moral foundations. Conservatives, they have 6. They have 6. So liberals have a more blinkered view of the moral universe. They can only see things on 2 moral foundations. Calm down, I'll get through it. It's all right. Protests at the end, it's fine. All right, so let's go through what these things are. Or actually, one more thing before I get to it. He wants to claim, and it's important to understand this from the very beginning, this is all genetic, right? He believes that moral intuitions are just a brute fact about human psychology. He's basing a lot of this stuff on Christopher Baum, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But just be aware right now that he believes that these fundamental intuitions are genetically based; they're not cultural. So let's go through the 6 foundations of morality. These are the 6 foundations of all of morality. So starting with number 1, you have the care-harm foundation. And the care-harm foundation, Haidt writes, evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of caring for vulnerable children. It makes us sensitive to signs of suffering and need. It makes us despise cruelty and want to care for those who are suffering. So the idea here, and we've talked about this some before, is human children are weird because when a mother gives birth to a human child, that child can't walk for more than a year. They're on their own. They have to be taken care of. You have to have a lot of social structure around them or that child's going to be dead, right? So the idea here is that there has to be a bunch of genetic tendencies built into both mothers and fathers to be able to protect that child. So you've all seen the pictures of the dolls with the giant eyes and all the things that evoke careness, right? That evoke people caring for children. So he wants to claim that it is just not conceivable that the chapter on mothering in the book of Human Nature is entirely blank, leaving it for mothers to learn everything by cultural instruction or trial and error. Mothers who are innately sensitive to signs of suffering, distress, or neediness improve their odds relative to their less sensitive sisters. So that's the first foundation, caring. And remember, that's the main liberal foundation from Haidt's moral matrix. Number 2, the fairness cheating foundation. So the fairness cheating foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of reaping the rewards of cooperation without getting exploited. It makes us sensitive to indications that another person is likely to be a good or bad partner for collaboration and reciprocal altruism. It makes us want to shun or punish cheaters. Now, originally when Haidt did his survey, he only had 5 moral foundations, and part of the reason is because he mixed up 2 types of fairness here. So in the original version, there's 2 notions of fairness, one that he originally thought liberals had and one they thought conservatives had. The liberal notion of fairness is outcome equality, and then the conservative notion of fairness is proportional fairness. So the difference is, if you want outcome equality, then you think everyone should get the same size slice of the American pie. If you have proportional fairness in mind, you think that if that guy over there worked for 3 hours and that guy only worked for 1 hour, then he should get 3 times more of the reward for doing his work. So originally he mixed those 2 together. In his more recent stuff, he's decided he has a separate foundation now, and he thinks that the liberal, he writes, egalitarianism seems to be rooted more in the hatred of domination than in the love of equality. So he got rid of the notion of fairness for liberals, and he pushed it off to another foundation. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3 is the loyalty betrayal foundation. And he writes, the loyalty betrayal foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of forming and maintaining coalitions. It makes us sensitive to signs that another person is or is not a team player. It makes us trust and reward such people, and makes us want to hurt, ostracize, or even kill those who betray us or our group. So he gives actually a nice example of this. He said immediately after 9/11, the very first thing that he did is he rushed down and bought an American flag sticker and he put it on his car. And that was his response to the night. And he said he felt it was really weird because he was he has a very liberal background, but he felt this compulsion to immediately show solidarity to the rest of the country, which is a very natural reaction. All right, so number 4, the Authority Subversion Foundation. The Authority Subversion Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of forging relationships that will benefit us within social hierarchies. It makes us sensitive to signs of rank or status and to signs that other people are or are not behaving properly given their positions. So this is the part of what he's relying a lot here on the Christopher Baum stuff, but this is where Christopher Baum argues that we inherited from our common ancestors of chimpanzees this need for hierarchy, that this is part of our built-in human nature. It's innate. We need this sense of hierarchy. You see this all the time, especially in military settings, and he just thinks that this is part of human nature. Foundation number 5, the Sanctity Degradation Foundation. So he writes, the Sanctity Degradation Foundation evolved initially in response to the adaptive challenge of the omnivore's dilemma, and then to the broader challenge of living in a world of pathogens and parasites. It includes the behavioral immune system, which can make us wary of a diverse array of symbolic objects and threats. It makes it possible for people to invest objects with irrational and extreme values, both positive and negative, which are important for binding groups together. So the American flag example, right? That's a violation of this foundation. It's an American flag. You can't just use it to clean your bathroom. That violates sanctity. He's also so that's an example of a conservative thing that's, sacred from a conservative perspective. He points out from a liberal perspective, there's many sacred things there as well. For example, the environment, very sacred, or anything you would find in Whole Foods. That's all sacred. Any organic food at all in Whole Foods, that would be sacred from a liberal perspective. All right, finally, number...
You can tell by the organic food on our altar in the back.
That's right. Oh, that's what it is. It's an altar. Nice. Number 6, the Liberty Oppression Foundation. So this was a new one that he added after that initial survey of 132,000. And he did this partially in response to what I was talking about before in terms of fairness, but partially also in response to the rise of the Tea Party and libertarianism. So this is the idea here, is the Liberty Oppression Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of living in small groups with individuals who would, if given the chance, dominate, bully, and constrain others. So again, this is coming from the Christopher Baum stuff, which, a lot of this stuff is based on the Christopher Baum stuff, but the idea in the Christopher Baum stuff is that originally we had an innate sense of hierarchy that we shared with chimpanzees. And then once we got into human tribes had to be egalitarian for reasons of cooperation. And so we had conflicting needs. We had both this instinctual need for hierarchy, and conflicting with that, we also had an instinctive need to prevent bullies, to foster cooperation. So he added this one in, again, really to, because libertarians, this is their main moral foundation. On the other moral foundations like caring, far lower. They score really, really low on caring. Everything's about don't tread on me. Okay, so one of the interesting things he did is he actually looked at how different churches, he actually got his hands on a bunch of sermons from Unitarian churches and Baptist churches, and he compared the number of key words from these different moral foundations that they used in their sermon to try to figure out, well, what was the leaning of the church. Not surprisingly, after analyzing the text in dozens of sermons, he found that Unitarian preachers made greater use of care and fairness words, while Baptist preachers made greater use of loyalty, authority, and sanctity words. So not a big surprise there. So that's the basic theory. That's the general moral foundations theory. Before I close, though, I just want to bring up there's a lot of things that you can object to here, but I did want to bring up 2 general issues that I found reading through the book. I want to start with the whole claim that Haidt makes that moral foundations are genetic, that claim. And I found that a little puzzling because he seems to say slightly different things at different times. So he did start the book by talking about how different cultures embrace different moral foundations. He starts by talking about he spent time in India, spent 3 months in India, and that gave her a greater appreciation of things like sanctity and also respect for authority, living in a different culture. So he seems to be saying there that he believes that there are important differences in different countries between the different moral foundations. In fact, he says multiple times that he thinks that there's something weird about the United States. He writes, "I've begun to see the United States and Western Europe as extraordinary historical exceptions, new societies that found a way to strip down and thin out the thick, all-encompassing moral orders that the anthropologists wrote about." So he also spent time going through descriptions by anthropologists, ethnographies, whatever they're called, of other cultures, and he found that, most cultures have more than the two foundations that liberals tend to promote. So I find this a little odd because clearly he's not claiming that there's genetic differences between people in the United States and people in India. That wouldn't make sense given what he says about the socioeconomic differences as well. Remember, he also says that Brazilian rich people are more like Philadelphian rich people in their moral outlook on the world, and economically lower class Brazilians are more like lower class Philadelphians. So, but I also don't think he's saying that there's a genetic difference between poor and rich people either. So it's a weird claim when he wants to claim that these moral foundations are genetically based, but at the same time he's talking about differences in different social classes. He does say that the moral foundations are crafted by natural selection. He's a believer in modules of the brain, like Jerry Fodor. He believes in brain modules. But he does also seem to think that our moral intuitions can be overridden by reason. At one place he writes, "The elephant, automatic processes, is where most of the action is in moral psychology. Reasoning matters, of course, particularly between people, and particularly when reasons trigger new intuitions. Elephants rule, but they are neither dumb nor despotic. Intuitions can be shaped by reasoning, especially when reasons are embedded in a friendly conversation or an emotionally compelling novel, movie, or news story." So going back, remember, to that initial metaphor of the writer and the elephant, he does seem to think that the writer can occasionally change what the elephant does. So it's not purely a matter of moral intuitions making all of our moral decisions. He seems to believe that the writer, the spokesperson, lawyer person, can in some cases change the path of the elephant. So it's not purely a Humean perspective. He also seems to have a slightly rationalist perspective on morality as well. The other aspect of Haidt's book that I didn't really understand is, I was puzzled about, is he never really answers the question, which you would think would be the most fundamental question in the book, is who's right? He never actually addresses the question of whether liberals are right or conservatives are right. And that's he does at one point, he briefly discusses the difference between descriptive and normative ethics, and the difference between just sort of describing what ethics people actually have versus what he thinks they should have. But then it's a really weird paragraph, then he quickly dismisses the question and agrees with Sam Harris and says he should be a rural utilitarian. And that's it. So given everything that led up to that, I found that weird. I'll just read one of the passages there. "I don't know what the best normative ethical theory is for individuals in their private lives, but when we talk about making laws and implementing public policies in Western democracies that contain some degree of ethnic and moral diversity, then I think there is no compelling alternative to utilitarianism." And then he just leaves it at that. So that's two dimensions he's throwing in there. He's making a distinction between your choices that you're making in your private life versus your public life. And he's also has another dimension where he's talking about descriptive versus normative ethics. So it's weird that the only thing he seems to be claiming in his book is he's giving an account of descriptive ethics, and he's not really touching into the other issues, which is very strange, especially when you remember some of these moral foundations are intrinsically in conflict, right? The libertarian one, the "don't tread on me" one, is inherently in conflict with the authority one. You can't have both, right? You have to either have the attitude of you can't tell me what to do, or you have to have that respect for authority. And given that there's a conflict, he doesn't really discuss how those conflicts should be resolved. He does seem to be leaning toward, for real ethics, we have to go beyond what the elephant does. One last thought. So one thing that I always find useful when thinking about moral naturalism or the genetics of morality is I always like to make a comparison between morality and following a good diet, right? Eating good food. In the case of a good diet, there's no question that genetically we have built-in taste receptors that make us really, really like sugary food, drives us to find as many donuts and gobble them up as possible. It makes perfect sense why that's true. If there's a limited supply of donuts in prehistoric times, then of course we're going to grab every donut and gobble it up. But we can make decisions now we can understand the root of that and then make a decision, well, to be healthy, which we assume is the goal of having, the particular taste receptors that we do, that we can override what our body naturally wants to do and understand, there's a smart way to go about living in the world. So the question here is, for something like respect for authority, we had an excellent sermon given earlier by Mickey on the Stanley Milgram experiments and why you need to be cautious about being, about submitting to authority too much. So the question obviously comes up. How much should you invest in these moral foundations as an actual moral theory rather than just a crazy stuff your elephant does? So anyway, let me stop here and let's open it up for discussion.